In 2014, the third generation of an SUV, or by that time already a crossover, was introduced, Kia Sorento. In most markets, it simply replaced its predecessor, but we sold it in parallel with it and, to avoid confusion, received the addition of Prime in the name, probably as a transparent hint at premium. If anyone does not know, in the first generation Sorento was a typical SUV with independent front suspension, a rear axle, part-time drive and a two-stage transfer case. It was produced in South Korea, Malaysia and Russia, at the Izavto plant, from 2007 to 2009 and in 2011. The SUV was popular, delighting owners with comfort and a good resource. The appearance in 2009 of the second generation Sorento somewhat confused the public. The car turned into a crossover with all-wheel drive, a load-bearing body and a transverse engine. Completely different car. However, it cannot be said that such a transformation happened in automotive history for the first time. Remember at least the Nissan Terrano. However, the novelty was liked by buyers, became popular and was actively sold until 2014, having survived restyling in 2013. Interestingly, in addition to the usual diesel and gasoline versions, methane cars and even hybrids were sold. The new generation was released in 2014, lit up in Paris and, as I said, received an additional Prime Index in Russia. The car is assembled in Kaliningrad at the Avtotor plant, equipped with 2 petrol and 1 diesel engines. More recently, the crossover has undergone an update, so let's talk about models, relatively speaking, 2015 to 2017. It must be said right away that, despite good sales, there are not enough statistics collected. Official servicemen explain this by saying that the car is very reliable, and surveys of owners have shown that there really are no major problems, but there are enough little things. In general, the car came to court and, despite all kinds of crises, sold excellently. Still, after all, a 7-seater crossover with a good finish, excellent equipment, and decent driving characteristics worth $2,300,000 is, pardon the pun, worth a lot. The third generation Sorento, including the Sorento Prime, had several engine options. A 2.2-liter diesel engine boosted to 200 horsepower has become widespread in our country, with a 2.4-liter gasoline inline 4-cylinder aspirated. A separate column was the GT-Line version with a beautiful body kit and an incendiary V6 with a volume of 3.3 liters and a shy 249 horsepower, with, adjusted by the firmware for the features of taxation. All engines have a decent margin for growth, all are chipped, especially, strange as it sounds, a diesel engine, which manages to get 240 horsepower without a significant increase in consumption for the average cycle. It has few shortcomings, and the main one is the timing drive. It is chain and quite suddenly it can start to rattle after 100,000 run. The replacement will cost 10,000 rubles. The poly V-belt tensioner for external units costs 5 times cheaper, but it also sells out twice as often. Its replacement is easy and inexpensive. The high-pressure fuel pump is picky about the quality of fuel and additives that are needed in winter. Problems with the cold start can equally mean that the diesel fuel is frozen, and that it is planned to replace the injection pump. It can be found on disassembly or rebuilt for 15,000. At one time there was a recall campaign for the glow plug controller, but it did not affect Prime. Very rarely, but there is an unpleasant failure of the transfer pump in the tank. If you stubbornly ignore the reserve light and empty the tank to 5 to 6 liters, the car may stall at full speed. Occasionally, in the secondary market in the eastern part of the country, there are Korean versions with a 2.0-liter diesel engine, which we know little about. But about the 3.3-liter gasoline they talk a lot and willingly, although not very interesting. The engine is reliable. He develops 249 forces, crawls under the tacks and traces his pedigree from the V-shaped 6s of the first-generation Sorento. It is distinguished by a dislike for low-quality lubricants and sometimes upsets owners with a leak in crankshaft oil seals. If you combine these 2 points, then the case can end with sticking rings, scuffing on the liners and decent expenses. The motor is powerful and accelerates the Sorento to 100 km per hour in less than 8 seconds. The less powerful 188 horsepower inline petrol 4 is not as fast. With it, a 2.5-ton car accelerates to hundreds in 10.5 seconds. In principle, it is also a sin to complain until you ride a more powerful version. Chip tuning helps to get strength. However, you cannot deceive physics, and the consumption will increase in proportion to the increase in power. Without chip tuning, Sorento with the 2.4 engine consumes up to 15 liters in the city. The problems of this motor are known, they are few and infrequent. Overflowing oil threatens to leak the crankshaft oil seal, and low-quality fuel instantly lights up the engine malfunction indicator, which will loom before your eyes until you call in the service. The timing mechanism must be serviced on time, and indeed the motor loves cleanliness. Dirty LVHD leads to floating idles, dirty wires to misfiring, and dirty fine filters to poor cold starts. At the same time, those who understand the topic recommend taking a diesel. They say, 2.4 will disappoint, and V6 is too expensive. The third generation Sorento suspension is a model of reliability, at least for the first 100,000 miles. Front, McPherson, rear, multi-link, which added a second wishbone, a more powerful subframe and vertically placed shock absorbers. Parts are available and repairs, if required, are not burdensome. On the most expensive versions, dual-circuit shock absorbers are installed with oil pumping to level the body level when loading. They cost $500. The real consumables are stabilizers and shock absorbers, especially when driving carelessly on bad roads. The rear stabilizer bushings may start to creak already at 30 to 40,000 mileage. They cost a little more than 500 rubles and change easily. The front ones almost always go about twice as long. The support bearings of the front struts, with careful driving, will pass 100,000 without problems, but the shock absorbers do not reach such runs. Fortunately, they are not expensive. Replacement will cost 6 to 7,000 rubles. With constant loads, the rear hub bearings can make noise. They change entirely with hubs and cost 17,000 each. The regular Sorento was sold with both automatic and manual transmissions. Only 6-speed automatics were installed on Prime Classic boxes with the torque converter and electronically controlled driving modes. Reliable unit that does not require frequent maintenance. The only drawback is that with runs over 50,000, vibrations can be transmitted to the cabin. This is not considered a defect, and vibrations can only be detected when crowded in traffic jams in the drive position. Changing oil, resetting errors, etc. do not help. But if the box began to kick when switching, then an oil and filter change is required. More serious problems have not been identified, or they do not appear in statistically significant numbers. Four-wheel drive is fundamentally the same as most crossovers, that is, the rear axle is connected through a multi-plate clutch that can be locked at speeds up to 40 km per hour. Despite its own name, Dynamax, the prime all-wheel drive clutch is essentially Haldex 4th generation. Reliable, durable, and not afraid of slipping. It is controlled by a mass of sensors and is actually a system of preventive connection of all-wheel drive. It is also called intelligent. That is, a turned steering wheel, a change in the trajectory, pressing the gas pedal, the operation of traction control and ABS, all this affects the degree of clutch loading. And this car is 100% front-wheel drive only when braking by the engine and at idle. In previous versions, the lock was connected only when slipping. The Sorento Prime was equipped with electric power steering and a dry rack. On the one hand, there is nothing to leak. On the other hand, noise is inevitable. At first, this bothered the owners, but later everyone got used to it, especially since the calls to the service did not really help. It is necessary to change the rail only if bites appear. In general, the handling of the third-generation Sorento can be called very good, but biting spoils everything. They changed the entire assembly, and it costs about 30,000 rubles. The need may appear at any run, and for any discomfort in the steering, whether it be steps, plugs, incomprehensible backlash, you need to immediately go to the service. But an empty steering wheel in the zero region is not considered a reason for complaints, as well as its seeming excessive lightness at low speeds. This is the algorithm of the electric booster. Most often, Sorento owners complain about weak windshields and minor annoying problems with interior equipment. Glass is covered with cracks from the slightest blow, and failures of various kinds of electricians quickly get bored. Many out-of-habit sin on domestic assembly, but purebred Koreans have the same problems. Failure of fog lights, shaking of cornering headlights, turning off the backlight of the instrument panel, noise of the ventilation motor, malfunction of power windows and curtains of the roof system. At the same time, one must understand that these are not common problems for all cars, but a list of what is most often contacted for service. There is also a backlash in the driver's seat, which gradually develops into a knock. But both side mirrors fold at the same speed, and not like in the previous generation, where the right one was twice as fast as the left one. and no one knew why. In the used car market, Kia Sorento Prime firmly maintains its per million price position. Only problematic or emergency cars are cheaper. Despite the fact that the competition in this niche is high, there is a demand for Korean premium, and it is fully justified. The car is inexpensive to maintain, quite reliable and very economical in the diesel version. She patiently endures experiments like increasing ground clearance or chip tuning. She is comfortable, handles well, and looks good. At the same time, you should not expect too much from the Sorento Prime. After all, it is not quite a premium, but somewhere close.